Hi, my name is Tim Lindquist. I'm a professor in the software engineering program at ASU Poly, and this video is in support of our course on mobile app development on Android and iOS, SER423. And this video is about unit number 11 of the course, which is about Android and iOS doing settings, and then also, actually we'll just cover settings in this video. And in the other section, or the other topic in Unit 11 is screen sizes and screen orientation. So let's take a look at the examples that are in Unit 11. We'll just kind of go directly from the examples so that you can see how they work. Both of those examples are based upon the student collection example that we had, and these demonstrate on the two different platforms the mechanisms that are available for you to be able to provide the user with the ability to place settings into your app. All right, so settings could be for all sorts of different things. Right, some of the common general settings on the platform, or on both platforms, are the brightness of the screen and other things of that nature. On the settings, app-specific settings may be for different sorts of things, whether or not the user wants to see displays in a vertical manner or a horizontal manner, or so forth. We're going to use it in this example as app-specific settings that are used to specify an IP address. Probably not so common of a thing for a app developer to allow the user to specify, but clearly something that we've come into in looking at our previous examples, where we have a server running someplace and we want to be able to specify whether the server is running on the local machine or someplace else. So it keeps the code familiar in terms of what you've already seen for the class, and it also provides a good example. So the idea then is that with both platforms, we'll take a look at the way we do it in Android. If we want to allow the user to change the host name of where it's actually going to go to get its model information, and the same thing for iOS. So these are in unit number 11. And let's take a look at iOS first. Let me open up that project. And I'm also going to get this server running. So the appropriate value for iOS is going to be localhost and then port 8080. And for Android, for the emulator, since it looks like a different machine, it's going to be its gateway, which is 10.0.2.2. But in any event, you can see I have running on I'm working with a laptop here, is what you're seeing. I have running on the laptop that server that serves up these information about two different students. So we're actually in the information.p list in this project. And remember that whenever we do any kind of network connections, we have to specify the appropriate permissions in order to request the appropriate permissions in order for that to happen. And in this particular case, since we're using an HTTP request instead of an HTTPS request, we have to ask to allow arbitrary loads. So that's in the information.p list. The other different thing about this project that you'll notice is that within the project folder itself, there is another subfolder called Settings Bundle. And Settings Bundle is where we specify the view that will appear for settings. So let's go ahead and run the app, and then I'll show you how it works out and why it's different in OS X than it is, or in iOS, than it is in Android. The emulator should be starting up here, or the simulator is starting up. So if you remember, this is a single view application, the exact same application we looked at before for doing JSON RPC requests, doing any kind of network request. And this simply has a student text field. The data source for that text field turns out to be a picker, and that picker shows us all of the students that are available for us to query on the server. And when we select one of them, it shows the information about that student. And then there is also for each of the students the courses that student is taking, right? So Jim Buffett is taking SER423, and the ability to add and remove students and to add and remove courses for them. Well, so the idea is that we want to be able to change the host and the port where this app is going to get information about students. And the way that that's done in iOS, different than the way that it's done in Android. Let's shut this down, or at least move it into the background. Since we have in our project the settings bundle, root.plist. Root.plist describes how in the settings app, right, so in iOS there is a special app for settings, and when we include in our project a settings bundle within the settings app, that will be recognized, and we will have, so here you can see app settings iOS JSON RPC student. And these are the settings that are specified in this settings bundle. All right, so we can go ahead and change. You can see that the default is localhost for the server, but we can change that to 127.0.0.1, which is the same thing, if I could type it correctly. 127.0.0.1, which is the IP address that is always on Unix systems always defined as localhost, and then our app will actually pick up that change in the settings. So let's go back to the app. And at this point, the app, so this is app settings. I think I put in a message that indicated how it went back and checked it. And let's see if it's actually there. Yeah, you can see URL to host will enter foreground. All right, so I'm in a method that gets called when the app goes back into the foreground. It goes and checks to see whether or not the settings have changed, and you can see that it now thinks that it's 127.0.0.1, where in the past, somewhere up here, when we first made the connection, it says localhost somewhere. There it is up there. HTTP:/localhost 8080, right? So making the change in the settings app in iOS is detectable by the app itself the next time that it opens up. And this program shows you how to go about doing that. So we'll take a real quick look at the code for it. I guess before we get into dive into that, in iOS, the way that it's done is by a settings app. In Android, the way that it's done, in the action bar, we can add to the menu a settings button. And then that settings button will display a view in which we can do the exact same thing that we're doing here. But within Android, settings are taken care of within the app itself with a special menu item that is, you'll see how we reference it when we take a quick look at the Android example. Okay, so all of the stuff that is associated with managing all of this is in the view controller, and that view controller has most of the code that's in here. Sorry, there's no way for me to highlight it. Most of the code that's in here is code that was there in our previous version of this example, but let me go up to the on create, or view did load, and in view did load, we set up all of the text fields and pickers as we've done before. But in terms of getting the user settings, this is new code. Get the user defaults in the app settings. So settings user defaults.standard settings.string for key protocol. So in our, I've got to go back. I'm going to switch back and forth here between the root.plist. So we have an identifier. With the first is the settings consist of 3 different things. The first one is an identifier as protocol. The default value is HTTP. So if we want to change it to HTTPS, the user could change it to HTTPS. So I've just gotten the setting for protocol, and you can see that the other identifiers, there's server host and port, right? So those are the 3 different values that the settings app allowed me to change. And my app is now picking up those values in the view controller when the view loads. So you can see here's picking up the protocol, picking up the server port, picking up the server host, and then I put them all together to get a URL string, prototype, // host and port. And now let's tell the notification center that we want to hear, right? So we need to have a method called every time we're about to be placed back in the foreground, because in iOS, the only way for the user to change those settings is to put this app into the background, go to the settings menu, and then sometime later come back to our app. So we're gonna tell the system that when we come into the foreground, we actually want to have an observer within us being the view controller, that says call will enter foreground within this view controller. So that's the name of the method, and the notification it specifies, because of the font size, in order to make it readable. The code isn't quite as readable as hopefully it will be when you look at it in Xcode, but we tell the name of the notification is application will enter the foreground. And then let's just go down and take a look at that very quickly at that method. It does the exact same thing that we already looked at, all right? And that in the view did load, we went and got the settings. Well, now that's what we're gonna do here. Every time we come back into the foreground, we go back to our defaults and we check and see what's the current value for protocol, server port, and server host, and then we set our URL string, and then because it may have changed, I should check in here to see if it did change, but it doesn't do that. But if it did change, then we go and update the pickers. In other words, our model changed, so update the view. Okay, so let's leave the iOS. I'll let you, I guess the other thing that one has to add when you set a notification with the notification center, you have to, when your activity or when your controller gets deinitialized, meaning when it gets reclaimed, you need to go back and say, don't notify me anymore. Otherwise, it'll be trying to notify a non-existent view controller. So that's what the deinit method, and this is the first time in the class we've seen the use of that. So notification center.default, remove the observer, which says, okay, you're about to get rid of me, me being the view controller, so don't try to send me any more notifications about I'm going to come into the foreground. And in that case, what's going to happen after the view controller gets recovered is that the next time it'll be starting up again, which will cause view did load to execute. All right, so much for iOS. Let's look at the exact same thing in Android, since we already have the server going. And let's see if I've got it down here in the list of. Yeah, there it is. Open recent. So let's go ahead, we'll just start by running it, and then we'll take a look at the changes that have to exist. So I've already got, let's use the currently connected device. I'm sorry, it's not a device, it is actually the emulator. And it's built, and now the exact same thing. What we had provided in this example, this one isn't nearly as extensive as the iOS one, but again, there is a spinner to allow us to pick which of the students, and then it displays some information about the student. In this version, we actually provided for the exact same thing as settings is going to provide us, an edit text at the top of the view that allowed us to change the URL, and then based upon changing that URL to do the refresh button. So instead of doing that now, we have a settings menu item, which only appears when we want it to. And within it, we have two different things: HTTP connections, if not checked, enter whatever protocol. So we're going to use HTTP connections, and then the ability to set the URL for JSON RPC. So http:10.0.2.2.8080, which is the exact same thing. We want to keep it at that so that it can make contacts to it, connects to it. But that is, right, so now we have to do a back in order to get back to our screen. So in Android, this is the mechanism for doing app-specific settings. And let's just very quickly take a look at how that all gets built into your project so that your users are able to do that. The first thing is in the main activity. Pardon me. So again, it's the same example that we looked at last time. And if you go all the way up to on create, same setups as existed before for the spinners and the edit texts. And this causes things to go out. Oh, where does it get the URL? Oh, that's not good. That's not good programming. So it actually uses the URL edit text in order to pick up the URL. In order to do the settings, we have to add a menu item. And the menu items, in order to do a new menu items, you have to create the folder for menu, right-click on resources and add a new item, the folder menu, and then, pardon me, within menu, add a main menu. And you can see that we have specified here two different items. One of them is the add button. Go back up here. Here's our add button. And then the other item is, and notice that we say show as an action if there's room. And the other item is menu settings preferences, IC_menu preferences. And order in category as 100, show as action, don't ever show it, right? Which means that it will always, the user will always have to click on the vertical ellipses in order to see anything that's back there in that settings menu. All right, and string menu settings, drawable IC menu preferences, which is the menu item that the icon that's already built into Android for doing the settings, which is nothing more than the word settings right here. That settings is the icon that's used for this particular button. Okay, so now where is that handled when we actually invoke it is back to the main activity. So on create doesn't have anything to do with the menu, setting up that menu, but there is on create options menu, and if we choose to override it, then in fact we can inflate the main menu or whatever menu that we want, r.menu.main menu, and then when it gets selected, right, so when the user selects the settings button, this method will be called, if we choose to override it, on options item selected. And here you can see we check whether or not the item selected is the menu settings, and if it is, then we create an intent for the settings activity class, and we start that activity expecting to get a result back. So we've added a new activity, the settings activity, and it has to extend the preference activity. And what it's going to do is to create a view for us. That view is somewhat special. It's a part of a fragment, but you can see on create looks at r.xml.preferences. So if you look in the resources, we now have also added a preferences.xml, and this is the special format for the settings menus. So you have to create an XML file, again with all of the resource files that are specifying a view. You can either design it with a designer or the text, the XML text, but this is a special item, XML item called preference screen. You can't use that within a normal layout. It has to be within the preferences.xml, and you can have different categories. Same thing with iOS. So in this case, there's only one category, which is for server preferences, and then you can see there's a checkbox preference and an edit text preference, just to show you a couple of the different preferences that are available. Okay, so now you can see on both platforms the different ways to go about doing app-specific settings. In iOS, it is done through the Settings app, and within the Settings app at the very bottom are settings for specific apps, and in this case there's the App Settings iOS with JSON RPC Student. And then within our Android platform, it is an action bar, action button for settings, which invokes a special activity, the preferences activity, or whatever we want to call it, and within it, a special view that's made up of things specified within that special preferences XML. Two different ways to do it on the two different platforms, and in fact, the options that are available within the preferences.xml for checkbox preference, edit text preference are very similar to the options that you'll find available within Xcode for in specification in the root.plist. The root.plist, it's a little bit cumbersome if you work at the level of the property list, but each of these different attributes associated with different items, really this is a visual way to edit XML, and it gives you different options as you go through this particular plist, property list. Okay, so let's leave it at that for our discussion of settings. And I want to end this video with a brief discussion of layouts, and we have two different readings in that. So this is also in Unit 11. There's an auto layout guide for iOS, and for Android developer, there is a section for the developer on supporting different screens. So so far in this class, we've been working with UI controls, and we've been working with navigation, allowing us to have multiple screens, to pass information from one screen to another, to pass the view from one screen to another. But we have not yet considered the issues that come into play, and it works for both platforms, of varying screen sizes. In other words, there's more pixels on one screen than on one device than another device, meaning that X and Y coordinates, X and Y values are different, screen resolution is different, and there's also different densities of pixels for different devices. And add to that the complicating factor of screen rotation, right? So instead of being a portrait, it can also be landscape. Both platforms have capabilities to allow you to specify layouts that are as applicable as possible to different layouts, different screen sizes, and both platforms also provide the ability for you to limit. So one of the popular common things is that an app may limit itself to only being portrait, or it may limit itself to only being landscape, and that can be done on either one of the platforms. Just to kind of characterize the auto layout guide for iOS, so in addition to that, if you want it to be both portrait and landscape, and to be as widely applicable to different screen sizes, this auto layout is actually what's currently being used in iOS, meaning that when you use the storyboarding tool, the interface builder, to build a storyboard and throw into your storyboard controls, those controls are placed in there with auto layout. Well, that hasn't always been the case for either platform actually. For iOS, I've forgotten the version number, it's only been within the last couple of years where these were not absolutely an absolute layout. In other words, when you place a control on a view at a certain point, it actually specifies the X and Y coordinates. So 0, 0 is the upper left-hand corner of the screen. X proceeds incrementally to the right and Y proceeds incrementally down. So for example, this upper left-hand corner of that text field, UI text field in iOS, maybe it's something like a Y value of 200 and an X value of 150 or something along those nature, along that size. And literally, in the past, the way that we've specified with both platforms, if you wanted to add things under program control, you'd specify the upper left-hand corner of a rectangle, and then you'd specify the dimensions, right? So to specify the upper left-hand corner, it's an X value and a Y value, departure from that upper left-hand corner, and then a size in terms of X and Y, how high and how wide each of these different controls are. Well, now, both platforms use auto layout. And we really should take a quick look at it. It's described in the readings on both of them, motivated. And then, all right, so this kind of describes what I just described in terms of X and Y and positions. And this talks about constraints within iOS. And constraints are now being added to Android, although so far as I can read from the community, there hasn't been a huge adoption of them yet. There are some other mechanisms, but we'll talk about those in just a minute. Within Xcode, let's just create a new project here. And just kind of show you. When you use the storyboard within iOS or within Xcode to build a view, let's just go ahead and put a label out. So the idea is that we have a label and then a text field. And then maybe we even want a little button beside it too. What we can do is very similar to the relative layout or linear layout. I'm sorry, very similar to the linear layout in Android. We can actually place these into what's called a stack view. So let's put this guy into a stack. And when I do that, let me just show you. I got to go back to the hierarchical view. So notice that within my view controller's view, right, there's the view, the whole thing. I've already got a label, and I've got a round style text field, right, that's the center part, and I've got a stack view which contains a button. But I can add to that stack view these other things, right? So let's put them all in the same thing, and then we're going to go back to the properties. This sets my stack view to be vertical. However, if I look at the properties for the stack view, not the button, the stack view, thank you very much. With the stack view, I can have it as a vertical or horizontal axis. So let's change it to horizontal, all right? So that makes them a little bit, hang together a little bit better. And of course, I can change the size of it. I'm actually trying to expand the size of it, and it's not letting me do it. But in any event, the idea is that by placing these things into a stack view, can I specify the size of this thing? Well, by placing them into a stack view, it's going to keep them together, and I can add constraints. All right. So for so stack view is the icon down here in the lower right, embed in stack, and you can throw anything into a stack you want. You can put stacks into stacks as well. So if you have groupings of 3 different things, you want them to be on 3 different lines, and you want that to stay depending upon orientation, independent of orientation or anything else. That can all be done with stack views embedded inside of stack views. And then we also have the ability to specify constraints. So let's go back and specify with our stack view. A very common thing is to add a constraint to keep it close to the left edge of the display and a certain number of pixels from the top of the display. So we can specify that by highlighting. All right, so I went down to the lower right-hand corner and did this. Looks like a TIE fighter if you're a Star Wars person. I selected that, and it says, give me the constraints. And I specified by clicking top and left that I want this stack view to be constrained to the top and the left. All right, and so this is a way to do different sorts of constraints. There are different kinds of constraints that can be added to any kind of a control. So let's just go ahead and leave these, all right? And now you see it is constrained. My stack view is constrained. Kind of bothers me that I can't expand the size of it, but that's all right. So now it's constrained. With rotation, it would stay relative to the left and the top, even rotated. Now, if I rotated it, you can see that the left and top would change. So that it'll do relative positioning that way. And I can define constraints between different objects as well. That is defined within this section. It's a very good section. As I said, we haven't played around with it, and I haven't asked you to do that. It's not as much, of course, on user interface as it is on the other important aspects of the platforms. So with Android, we do it a little different way. They have created for us a constraint editor in Android, but there are 4 generalized sizes: small, normal, large, and extra large. And same thing in terms of densities, right? So screen sizes can be of 1 of 4, and the densities can be 1 of low, medium, high, or extra high. And for each of these, we can actually specify different layouts. So in my Android project, I could actually have different layouts so if I had a main activity layout, I could actually have different main activity layouts based upon different characteristics of the display. And that is described in this section. So create different layouts, and you can see here layout, a layout large, and so forth. All right? So there are different mechanisms that are provided within Android to provide for different screen sizes and also different densities. And we do the exact same thing with bitmaps as well. Okay, so let's leave it at that for this section. And I'm just going to keep this thing going. I do want to do one more.
Sounds good.
Is that all right?
Yeah, and then we're just going to pause for 5 seconds because Nick likes to have the...
Absolutely, no problem at all. So I'm leaving the recording going on Camtasia this time, so you don't have to go back and resync. You only have to do that once.
Cool, you're good to go whenever.
Ready?
Yep.
Okay, 3, 2, 1. Hi, my name is Tim Lindquist. I'm a faculty member in the software engineering program at ASU. This is a video supporting our course in mobile application development, SER423 on mobile apps, where we talk all about iOS and Android, the 2 very popular platforms for mobile devices. This video is in support of Unit 12 of the class on data sharing. And I want to kind of combine them together into one to give you some of the ideas that are presented for both of those platforms for sharing data. And we just have one example in this one that we'll take a look at. Well, actually, we have one example for each of the different platforms. And that has to do with working with contacts. So let me kind of characterize first the 2 different platforms and what is available for sharing. In an earlier unit, we already talked about with Android the ability to do persistent storage. on either internal storage or external storage. So as the app developer, you decide which is the appropriate place to put any data that you want. And usually an app that that deals with a lot of data may want to put certain storage in both. Internal, meaning that no one except the app has access to it. No other apps can get to it. It's private to the app. External, meaning that not only can other apps get to it, but the user can also get to it as well. And it may be that you want to export from your app a certain format that the user may access in order to keep, maybe keeping a running record of the data that you're collecting for the user on the app. And they may want that to be, to be on their desktop system, openable through, I don't know, Microsoft Excel or something else. On Android, it's very easy for you to do that. The other way to share data in Android is, of course, using cloud services, and those are more appropriate if you want to have the same data that's shared by multiple different devices. And what you would do in that situation would be to use cloud services in order to export. Maybe it's a database, or maybe it's a file in a specific format. Commonly it's JSON. And then honestly, the interface between your app and the cloud is very similar to what we looked at for doing a JSON RPC. So those are two mechanisms for sharing data. The other thing that is built into the app are what are called content providers. And content providers in Android are a separate class, meaning that there is a class in the API called a content provider. And when you implement a content provider, it allows other apps to access your data. So instead of storing a file someplace that everybody can get access to, you actually provide a content provider. That content provider is organized in such a way that other apps can connect to it and make queries of your data. And it quite literally is in Android very similar to a content provider is very similar to a database where other apps would formulate a query and send that query to your content provider, and then it would provide the information that had been requested. So here you can see your application has a content provider, implements the content provider, or by extending that class. You've got access to some kind of storage that you're keeping, presumably in your private area, in internal storage. And other applications, other apps running on the device are able to connect to you and get information from your content through your content provider. So in particular, as is suggested in the unit, Android provides content providers. The most common information that may be shared among different apps in Android is, not just Android but iOS also, is information about contacts that are registered on the phone or in the cloud, or also information about events, calendar information as well. Both of those are available through content providers provided by Google to get information about calendars or events, and also about contacts. So the other mechanism that's available that we haven't discussed is a thing called a server, Advantage Content Providers. They talk about creating a content provider, the content provider basics, go through the mechanisms for providing and creating a content provider, how you provide search mechanisms to other applications, and so forth. We're not actually going to go through an example of that, but to let you know that it's available. The other basic component of an Android app that we haven't talked about are a service. Services are more commonly used for playback, audio or video playback. So if your app is doing audio playback in particular, it may create an extension of a service class. That service class will continue to execute because it is an extension of a server class, of service class. will continue to execute even though your app may go in the background. So if you're an app that's playing media, is the best example, playing music, then in fact you don't want that music to stop playing when your app is moved to the background in preference of another app. You want it to continue, and the service provides the ability to do that. Okay, so let's take a look at this example on content provider, contacts for contacts, and let me just open it up here. So when you download and open up this app, let's go ahead and get it, we'll just go ahead and run it, and then we'll go back and I'll make a few comments about the code itself. So this app provides the ability to add a new contact. So let's just suppose that we want to add All right, so what happened was we added Joe Smith and sent an intent to the Contacts app to go to its view that is to add a new contact. We actually sent it the information that we had to partially complete that contact. In particular, we had the name, we had a phone number, and we didn't have any telephone. I'm sorry, yeah, we did have a phone. We didn't have it, so this is registered as the default phone number, which I thought was home. And we had an email for them, all right? But we could actually provide additional fields of information. And then when we want to add them into the contacts list, we select that. So if you're not familiar with Android, you can see, actually, let's go back. This goes back to our app. Let's stop our app and go to the Contacts app on Android, which is right here. And now you can see I've got 3 different contacts. I've created all 3 of them as going through this in different classes, but Joe Smith, Sue Jensen, and Tim Lindquist. So this is the Contacts app for the device or for Android. And you can see now that we have information on each one of them. So your app may wish to register an event on the user's calendar. It may wish to get information about who the contacts are, about who calendars are, and you can do that through intents as well as through using content providers. So this example shows you doing that through using an intent. And let's take a look at the code in the main activity. So in the main activity, on create, you can see it sets up an adapter, and this get contact names. It uses an internal method, get contact names, in order to set up the names to be displayed. So let's take a look at that. And here's an example of using the content provider for contacts. It's called the contacts contract. A common data kinds structured name, right? So I'm looking for a name, a content item type, and then I send the content resolver a query, which is based upon that where the names parameter is open to be any name. All right, and that's going to provide for me a cursor, just like in a database. I go through that cursor and add each one of them to the array that is going to be the input to that adapter. All right, so get contact names is an example of using the contact app's content provider. We just looked at the documentation for how you go about setting up contacts, or content providers. The section in the reference book is also very good on it too. So let's also look at, just very quickly here, if we go back to the app, we'll just cause it to run again this way. All right, so that's how we end up with this spinner having all of the names that are in our contact list by the get contact names. And then if we choose, once we hit the add method, add clicked is the method that gets called. And you see it creates a intent, which is a contract intents. And there are several different intents that are provided by the content provider. And one of them is to insert, all right, to add a new contract. And I'm providing some additional information about it. So put extras, right? One of them is the email, insert a phone number, and insert a phone type. So probably whether it's home or or what type it is, a cell phone or home. And then also name, all right, a name as well, and then I start the activity. And that is what causes me to switch. So let's suppose we want to add Sue Smith. So when I do the add, you can see I switch from this app to the Contacts app. So let's do the same thing in iOS, and you can see how it's done in iOS. I'm going to open up the example that you can download from the... All right, so now I'm going to go to this iOS contacts, and in iOS it's a little bit different of a mechanism to provide it, but let's take a look at it in this example. See if I've had it opened recently. So in iOS, actually, I took it off. In the last year, the interface to contacts in iOS has changed, and this app actually demonstrates the new way to do it. If you happen to download an example before the middle of the semester, before the end of the semester, then in fact you might have gotten the wrong one. So this one is a way to browse contacts that exist on the phone, and it shows you how you can actually do a similar thing that's done with Android, and that is jump into a scene within the Contacts app. And that's done by doing this pick a contact, and then add a contact. It shows you how to do the adding as well. So let me just kind of, before I do that, let's stop this app and let's go to contacts. So contacts are one of the extras that are provided. And in iOS, the Contacts app starts out with a search, right? So this is a table view. And when you select one of the contacts, then you get a detailed view of that particular contact. You have the ability to edit it or go back. And of course, you can search based upon a string, based upon the name. So that's the Contacts app in iOS. Cancel that, and let's go back here to our app. So when we do a pick a contact, it allows us to jump to that exact same view controller in the Contacts app, and it shows us all of the different contacts that are available. So if I pick Kate Bell, then in fact her information is displayed. If I pick John Appleseed, his information is displayed. Right? If I pick Tim Lindquist, his information is displayed. If I want to add a contact, then this app pops up a new screen that, so let's do, who was it, Sue Smith. given name is Sue, family name is Smith, and phone number 480-727-2777, and email is sue@asu.edu. So, okay. And now, when we go back to pick a contact, you'll see that under S is Sue Smith. So here's the information on Sue Smith in the contacts, the information that we provided for her. So let's take a look at the organization of this particular app. We'll just take a quick read of it, and then we'll leave it at that. I do want to show you. Actually, I want to go back. So there's in this app. There is only the view controller is the only class that's in it, and the storyboard doesn't. No surprises in the storyboard as well, right? These are just actually two table views that are used as lists to show the phone numbers and the email addresses that are returned by the contacts. So you'll find in the app the data source. There's just one set of methods that is the data source for both of those table views. The view controller itself, it may seem a little bit complex, but considering that it's dealing with all of that stuff, that's not really bad. Notice that the view did load has very little associated with it other than to tell the table views, phone table view and the email table views, which are IB outlets to those table views that we just looked at on the storyboard, that this object is the data source for it. That will cause, let's see, show contact. Oh, we got to go. CN contact picker delegate. So when we pick a contact, it's going to cause a callback to a method in this class, and table view data source I've already done as well. Initially, email addresses and phone numbers, which are the data sources for both of those pickers, for both those table views, are empty arrays of strings. And the contact picker, this is the delegate method for the contact picker. When actually a contact got selected, this is what gets called. And add a contact. This gets called at that point, and it creates the UI alert view with the different text fields that it needs to have it. So each of those text fields it's kind of like an array of text fields that are accessed. And save a new contact. So this is to show you how to actually make a contact and place it into the contacts, contact providers, contact list of contacts. And actually the part of that, I'll show you the documentation that comes almost directly out of that. And these are nothing more than the methods that are providing for you the data source for each of those pickers. In order to, there's two different components of the interface to contacts that are being shown in this, and those are shown down in the references for this section. The contacts UI for displaying contact information is the view controller for contacts. And then this section on fetching and saving contacts is for adding contacts, right? So in iOS, a specific set of classes are provided that are available to you that you can manipulate, create objects of, instances of, and then request that those objects be placed into the contact list or may be used to change a contact as well. So contact objects, the CN contact, there's in consistent with the paradigm for iOS programming. There is a contact class which is not changeable. So when you get a contact out of the list of contacts, the available contacts, it comes to you as a contact object. If you want to make changes, you have to actually place that into a mutable contact, which is an extension of that, where you can make changes. And they show you how to create contacts. So here's very similar to what's in the app, shown in the add method, and shows you how to do localization as well for it. So fetching contacts is done by getting access to the contact store, CN Contact Store, and you'll see that in the app as well. The first time you request access to it, you have to have a key within your info.p list. The name of the key is privacy contact, usage description, and then this is a message that gets sent to the user. Let's go ahead and do this again. So the first time that the app is launched after it's been installed, it actually asks for permission, asks the user for permission, and that's a little different than the way that it's done in Android. Let's not go through that. So the contacts, access to the contacts is both declared within the P list, and then in addition to that, the first time the app is launched or tries to access the list of contacts, this message, the app requires access to your contacts. Whatever message you place as the string value of that key will get presented to the user, and the user then has to select yes or no. I was trying to show you how to do that, but with my mouse on the laptop, I can't uninstall the app. Okay, so let me just go ahead and summarize this section. So what we've looked at in Unit 12 is the ability to share information, your app's information to be shared with different apps and with different devices as well. And then we've also looked at the built-in mechanisms within both iOS and Android for the predefined apps to share information, and most commonly those are contacts and events. Those aren't the only one. That is not the only information that's shared by built-in apps. There's others as well, but these are the most common ones that are used. So I'm going to leave it at that for today, and I will see you next time.